Should you buy the RTX 3080 or wait for the 3080 Ti? More and more information is coming out, as well as what it can mean for stock and availability. So don't give up yet, and let's talk about it. Hey guys, Tiago here with Classical Technology. So let's talk about the RTX 3080 versus the 3080 Ti. Now recently, more and more information has been leaking from the 3080 Ti, and it makes a lot of sense that it's going to be coming out because honestly, we need something between the 3080 and the 3090, not to mention something to compete with AMD's offering. So the first thing we're going to talk about here is stock and availability. This is of paramount importance across the board. It doesn't matter what a GPU is priced at, what the MSRP is, what's available is going to be the most important factor in your GPU purchasing, at least for the next few months. So let's talk about a little bit of the history as to what's been going on. First, when the RTX 3080 launched, that launch certainly was very limited. Nvidia had to apologize for it. There were certainly a lot of issues, a huge amount of demand. And then as time went on, the 3090, nothing really changed with that. That's a very niche card. But by the time that we got to the 3070, there was a noticeable change in stock and availability. This makes sense given that with an MSRP of $499, it's going to be a much more mainstream and widely available card. And from what we saw, not only in local stores like Micro Center, which got well over 100 per store in a lot of cases, online, a lot of people were able to get them as well from Best Buy and Newegg, as well as worldwide. It seemed like the 3070 certainly was available more. I don't want to say that it was in plentiful stock. Still sold out very, very quickly, but more people got it than they got the 3080. By the time we got to the 3060 Ti, things improved somewhat, even a little bit more than the 3070. It seems like even more people were able to get their hands on that GPU. Once again, these GPUs are going to have a much easier yield in terms of the manufacturing compared to the really high-end parts. So that aside, AMD then launched their GPUs, and as competitive as they were, certainly the 6800 and the 6800 XT had some pretty significant launch issues. In fact, even when the AIB partner cards were supposed to come out a week after the original reference launch from AMD, pretty much they were nowhere to be found, and as of today, the stock replenishment on the AMD side, unfortunately, is very, very limited. Don't get me wrong, they have some very competitive GPUs. I have a 6800 myself that I like to use. In terms of gaming, it certainly puts up great numbers. The 6800 XT is great as well. 6900 XT is a very interesting GPU. I think it's a little overpriced for what it is, much like the 3090, but stock issues have certainly plagued AMD more than we thought they would. That's why it's a little bit of a surprise. So where does that leave the 3080 now versus the 3080 Ti? Now, believe it or not, Nvidia certainly has been restocking. They've been a little more aggressive, even with retail. For example, various times that I've actually walked into Micro Center, and I know they don't have these everywhere. I know it's not available worldwide, but I use it as sort of a benchmark, at least for certain parts in the United States. When I've walked in there to get something else, I've seen that they've had 3080s and 3090s even on the shelf. Somebody even shared a picture recently where they had like 10 3090s on the shelf. So these aren't absolutely, paper products or anything like that. They certainly have been available more and more. So having a 3080 Ti come out, that could possibly first free up a little more stock for the 3080, and with the timing, as it's probably going to come out sometime early in 2021, by then hopefully a lot of these supply and demand issues have sort of fixed themselves to the point where things are actually going to be a little bit more smooth, and you may have a better chance at getting a 3080 Ti. Since it is going to be a more expensive GPU, and we'll talk about the price soon, you would assume that less people would probably go for it. Usually that's going to be a bad combination if there's limited stock, because then everybody wants it regardless of the price. But if we have stock of 3070s and 3080s and those people are happy, it's possible that if the 3080 Ti actually comes out with even 3070 levels of stock, you may have a little bit more availability and an easier time buying it than any other GPU before it. And you can bet after all of the recent issues that Nvidia has had, especially with all of the the launches and having less GPUs, of course AMD had similar, I'm pretty sure they would love it if they could have a GPU produce the numbers that would at least satisfy people on the surface a little bit more than everything else. Stock and availability issues aside, let's talk about some potential pricing. MSRP of the 3080 is $699, and we do see a lot of AIB third-party GPUs between $699 and that $800 range. Of course, the higher up you go, like if you're going to get an Asus Strix 3080, that's going to be over 800, or like an EVGA for the Win 3. Those higher end GPUs, because they have, better coolers, more intricate designs, they're going to be more expensive, but you can certainly find a lot of 3080s for that $700 to $750 range. Now, I would think that the 3080 Ti, in order to compete with the 6800 XT and the 6900 XT, should most likely come in somewhere around maybe $999 to $1,100. That's what I would guess. If it's any higher, it gets way too close to the 3090. If it's any lower, it's too close to the 3080, which will probably present itself as a better value. And it starts to get really close to the AMD GPUs. And while it may not be that big of a deal now that stock is limited, when stock eventually becomes more replenished and plentiful, they're going to have a big fight in their hands against the AMD GPUs, especially if they're near the price point. So the 3080 Ti really does have to be an attractive option in terms of its price, because it's going to have some hefty competition between the 6800 XT, the Nvidia's own 3080, and not to mention the 6900 XT. The 3090 is going to be still, I think, more expensive, so that GPU is still going to stay sort of in the stratosphere, but the pricing really has to come in, I think, around $1,000, maybe a little more, a little less, for them to stay highly competitive. So now let's talk about performance. If the 3080 we can consider one of the best performing GPUs from the price for a very long time, that's why it's in such high demand. I think if you gave most people an option, would you have X GPU or an RTX 3080, most people for $699, $750 would go for the RTX 3080. So then you might ask, what is the point of the 3080 Ti? Well, in terms of performance, the first point that you can bring up is possible VRAM. Now, the 3080 does have 10 gigabytes of DDR6X, which is going to be the fastest VRAM. It does have 10 gigabytes, which some people complain that for a high-end GPU, you may really start to reach that limit if you're trying to max out 4K, like in Flight Simulator 2020, or in really advanced games. You can really start to get near that sort of limit. Not to mention in content creation, many apps do take advantage of well over 10 gigabytes of VRAM. That's sort of why the 3090 exists with its 24 gigabytes of VRAM. I would think it would make a considerable amount of sense for them to do minimum of 16, but most likely 20 gigabytes of VRAM. 20 gigabytes of VRAM will give them some headroom over AMD's offering. AMD, basically the 6800, the XT, and the 6900 XT all have 16 gigabytes of VRAM, and it's going to be the regular vanilla GDDR6. They kind of make up for some of that speed difference with some, 128 megabytes of the Infinity cache and some type of, software magic. But still, for a lot of people, if they see 20 gigabytes of VRAM on a 3080 Ti, that's certainly going to be a little bit more appealing, especially if you're doing content creation or if you're maxing out games at 4K and possibly 8K. If we start thinking really future-proof, you're going to need a lot of VRAM for whatever very demanding games come out. So I can see this being one of the biggest hardware advantages that a 3080 Ti would have over the 3080 and all of the AMD GPUs. I think it's going to come down to that VRAM. Of course, it's going to be faster and perform better in general than the 3080, but the 3080 is already putting out really great performance. And let's remember that the 3080 Ti, from what we've seen so far, seems to not be a jumped up 3080, but rather it seems to be sort of a scaled down RTX 3090. So that's certainly pretty impressive, as the 3090 puts up fantastic numbers, especially for content creation, especially with that 24 gigabytes of VRAM. So if you have a GPU that comes in significantly cheaper, like I said, around that $1,000, $1,100 at most, 20 gigabytes of VRAM, and basically has very close performance to the 3090, and if it can beat AMD's offering, I think you could have potentially a very, very high performing GPU that comes in at a price that's really justifiable. And then with everything else, like in ray tracing, DLSS, traditional rasterization, you can expect a GPU like the 3080 Ti to incrementally perform better than the 3080 and be somewhere right below the 3090. Of course, they can't just beat the 3090, that wouldn't make any sense. So you can expect the performance to, I don't want to say right in the middle, but it's going to be somewhere in that range. And of course, for a lot of people, they may actually go towards a 3080 Ti versus AMD just because of the inclusion of ray tracing and DLSS. It's no surprise here that Nvidia still has a pretty sizable lead over AMD when it comes to ray tracing, when it comes to DLSS. So to summarize, should you go for the RTX 3080 or should you go for the 3080 Ti? I actually think for a lot of people, the 3080 will be the right choice if you can find it in stock at MSRP. Let's say you pick one up for $699, $750, whatever, as long as it's a fair MSRP price. I think most people are going to be absolutely thrilled with the performance they're going to get, not only in ray tracing with DLSS and traditional rasterization. It's a GPU that really performs really well, and 10 gigabytes of VRAM, while technically it may be an issue in very specific use cases, I really don't think it's going to be that big of a deal. It's more than enough to play pretty much anything, even at 4K, 1440p and lower, of course you're going to be fine, but even at 4K, most games are absolutely fine with this type of setup. You really have to be doing something very specific for even to get close, and if you know you want to do that, you're going to have a much more advanced setup, and maybe something like a 3090 or the upcoming 3080 Ti will make sense. I think definitely you are going to be a little bit more future-proof just because you have more VRAM, it's a little bit faster GPU, but then you have to ask yourself, is that price difference going to be worth it? We have to see exactly what the MSRP is going to be, as well as what the AIB partner cards will be priced at. But overall, I think most people, I'd say 99% of people, should be more than happy with the 3080. Alright guys, so I hope you enjoyed. Remember to smash that like button, subscribe for more content like this, helps the channel grow, and I'll see you guys on the next video.